Welcome to our FedTalks executive video series. We're here with Ben Cushing, Chief Architect, Federal Health and Life Sciences at RedHat. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
My question for you here is, where do you see the greatest opportunities now for AI and ML and also automation to improve citizen services?
Yeah, I actually believe that AI and automation have to go hand in hand to actually be successful. Most of the AI programs that I've witnessed be rolled out have failed if they didn't have some sort of automation. And that's because AI is a big part of workflow, right? You actually have to assert AI at some point within a workflow for it to actually matter. Otherwise, it's just empty information that nobody actually uses. So the area where I'm most excited is actually at the bedside. We've had this concept in healthcare for a long time of clinical decision support. Clinical decision support has traditionally been heuristics and rules, and which are technically inclusive inside the AI bubble. But now as we get into the machine learning world, we can actually apply better algorithms to actually offer clinical decision support to clinicians at the time they need it. The challenge to actually be successful is to supply those predictions, recommendations, and probabilities within their current workflow. And automation plays a really important role there. If you can actually automate the clinical care pathway that the doctor is on or the nurse is on, then you know when to assert AI predictions, probabilities, and recommendations, right? And you can actually create stopgaps to actually allow those insights to be served up properly. And in that way, you actually provide contextual recommendations. That's the other thing too. Like having an AI tell you about a patient who has emergent diabetes is not helpful at all if the patient's not in front of you, right? You need that when you're actually having the patient encounter. So for me, the most exciting space is that area of better diagnoses, and then also the impact to population health. So the roll-up of that activity to better care for large cohorts of patients.
I appreciate you sharing those examples. Very interesting to hear. The other question I have for you is, how do you see federal agencies shifting their IT investment priorities heading into the new fiscal year, particularly based on your recent meeting with agencies?
Yeah, I think the first one is sort of well-known and obvious. There's a lot of money going into meeting the demands for zero trust within agencies, so there's obviously a lot of movement there. I just talked on the stage about how actual IT modernization is hand in hand with zero trust. So much of the IT modernization, activities and new products and so on already adhere to zero trust principles. So I think there's that's happening wholesale. I think the other two areas that I run across the most is investments in AI concept, AI proof of concepts. There's a bit of that for the most part, but I think that falls under the umbrella of innovation. And I think innovation is really the other area where we're seeing a lot of activity. I think the two most important technologies within the innovation umbrella are probably edge computing, and I'll just stop there. It's edge computing. And the reason I say that is right now there's been this over adjustment to cloud. Okay, so everybody has been racing to get into the cloud. And now that we're all there, or at least, there's stragglers, but everybody's like really getting there fast, there's a realization that there are things in the cloud that work really well and there are things that don't. And data gravity, for instance, is a big problem within cloud. And there are solutions to that. And a lot of those solutions are things like edge computing, where you're bringing the data, where you're bringing the compute closer to where the data is. There's also a side effect of that where you actually reduce the amount of data that moves across your network, and so it significantly reduces the load on the infrastructure. So I think there's an edge use case for pretty much every agency, every single branch out there. The most extreme example I always give is like what we're doing with the International Space Station, where there's actually inferencing happening on the space station itself, primarily for bacteria sequencing and genome sequencing. Very cool use cases, but like that is a very unique example and an extreme example versus like an agency like VA that wants to do bedside streaming of devices that are monitoring patients, and then actually creating insights from that streaming as close to the patient as possible so that you have low latency, and so the data also is not moving across the entire VA network and taking it down. Those are the types of investments I think are on the horizon and are being introduced to government solicitations now, but not explicitly. It's sort of implicit in the requests.
Well, Ben Cushing, thank you so much for stopping by and sharing some of your observations and insights with us here at FedTalks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.